I used to think there wasn't much left in this world that could shake me. I've hiked most of the Blue Ridge by myself, camped through storms that nearly tore my tent apart, and spent more nights alone in the woods than I can count. But this one night, it did something to me. Changed the way I look at the forest. Changed the way I feel about silence. It was the fall of 2019, somewhere near the old Ranger Trail off Flat Rock Hollow, the kind of place where the trees grow so close together the sky barely gets a word in. It was supposed to be just another solo weekend trip. I'd parked my truck at a closed trailhead, hiked about 6 miles in with a 70-pound pack, and set up camp near an old clearing. The air smelled like pine sap and wet dirt, that clean, quiet kind of mountain air that makes you forget people exist. The first night went smooth. I cooked some beans, read by my headlamp, and fell asleep to the steady hum of crickets. The second night, though, it was different. The woods felt heavier. The sound of insects had faded, replaced by this faint, low rustle that came and went, almost like someone dragging a stick along the ground far off. I tried to brush it off as deer or maybe wind in the brush, but it stayed with me, always faint, always distant. I remember checking my watch. It was 11:42 p.m. That's when I saw it. A light. Small, pale yellow, like a lantern glow cutting through the trees. It was too low to be a star, too steady to be fireflies. I thought maybe it was another camper who'd set up nearby without me noticing. I called out, just a casual, "Hey there." But my voice didn't travel. It was like the woods swallowed the sound whole. The light didn't move for a while. It just hovered between two trees maybe 50 yards out. I figured I'd walk over and say hello, maybe share the fire or ask if they needed help. But when I turned my flashlight on, the light went out. Instantly. Just gone. I stood there in the dark for what felt like a long time. My flashlight beam caught nothing but branches and mist. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. I told myself it was nothing. Probably someone putting their lantern out for the night. But I couldn't shake that feeling. The kind that sits behind your ribs and whispers that something isn't quite right. I got back in my tent, zipped it halfway, and kept the light on inside. The forest went quiet again. Not peaceful quiet. Dead quiet. Even the wind stopped. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady, crunching pine needles. They were soft, but they were real. Someone was walking out there, circling wide around the camp. Every time I tried to pinpoint the direction, the sound shifted. Left, then right. Behind me, then somewhere down by the creek. I called out again, louder this time. "Hello? You lost out there." No answer. Just silence and that faint smell of smoke. Or maybe kerosene. I waited, holding my flashlight like a weapon, until the footsteps faded. After that, I didn't sleep. I must have sat there until the sun came up, staring at the fabric of the tent, waiting for something to move. When daylight finally came, I stepped outside. Everything looked normal. Just trees, rocks, and a thin line of fog curling through the brush. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, until I looked down. There were footprints. Not animal boots. Deep enough to be fresh, pressed into the wet soil. They led right up to my tent door and stopped. No tracks leading away. Just a perfect line of prints walking up. And then nothing. That should have been my cue to pack up and leave. But I didn't. Stubbornness or stupidity, I don't know which. I told myself it was probably an old hunter or someone passing through. I tried to let it go. But the woods, they didn't want to let me go. By sunset that evening, the air turned colder than it should have. My breath came out in visible puffs. I built a fire, made coffee, and sat watching the tree line, pretending to relax. That's when I caught it again. The lantern. Same distance as before, same slow swing back and forth. But this time I didn't move. I just watched. It floated between the trees, steady and calm. Then it started to come closer. One step at a time. I could hear faint crunches on the forest floor. Not like someone rushing, but pacing, deliberate. I yelled again, trying to sound confident. "You're trespassing, buddy." No response. Just that light getting closer. bright enough now to cast faint shadows across the trees. I raised my flashlight, pointed it straight toward the glow, and it went out. Vanished, same as before. But the smell hit me instantly. Strong kerosene, sharp and bitter in the cold air. Then came the noise. The soft scraping of boots on pine needles, moving slow, right up behind me. I turned, but my flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in total darkness. I froze. Listening. The sound stopped. For a moment, it was like the woods were holding their breath with me. I whispered, "Who's there?" And right then I heard the faintest exhale, close enough to stir the hair on my neck. Not wind. Not my imagination. A breath. I ran back to the tent, zipped it shut, and grabbed my knife. I could hear movement again, something brushing against the fabric, maybe circling me. Then silence. I must have sat there, blade in hand, for hours. When dawn came, the first thing I did was check the ground again. More prints this time. Circling the tent, crisscrossing the clearing as if whoever, or whatever, it was had been pacing all night. I followed the prints a few yards before they disappeared into the forest. I thought about following them, but something deep in me said don't. It wasn't fear exactly. More like my instincts just knew it wasn't a good idea. I packed everything up and left within the hour. I don't remember much of the hike back. Just the weight of feeling watched the whole way. Every now and then, I'd catch a flicker of light far off between the trees, like someone walking with a lantern just out of reach. But whenever I turned to look, it was gone. Back at my truck, I finally felt safe enough to breathe. I started the engine and drove out of there fast. When I hit the paved road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and swear to God I saw it. Way down the trailhead at the edge of the tree line, that faint yellow glow swinging slow like it was watching me go. I didn't go back to the mountains for almost a year after that. When I finally did, I told the ranger at the outpost about it. He didn't laugh. Didn't even look surprised. He just asked where I'd camped. When I told him near Flat Rock Hollow, he nodded slowly and said, "You're lucky you left when you did." I asked him what he meant. He said, "There used to be a ranger station out that way, back before the fires in the 80s. One of the rangers disappeared during patrol. Last anyone saw of him, he was carrying a kerosene lantern. Folks still say he walks that trail at night, checking camps that shouldn't be there." I didn't say anything back, just thanked him and left. But that night when I got home, I unpacked my gear and found something stuck to the bottom of my tent, a blackened smear of oil. It smelled faintly of kerosene. I've camped since then plenty of times, but I don't go deep anymore. I stay where I can still see a porch light in the distance, because out there, where the forest grows too thick and the air gets too still, sometimes I still think about that lantern swinging between the pines looking for something or someone that never came back. We used to camp out every summer, me and two of my old friends, Kevin and Ross. It started as a tradition back when we were kids. Weekend trips, cheap tents, a cooler full of beer, and no signal on our phones. We were all in our early 30s by then, but we still went every year. It was a way to get away from jobs, bills, and everything that made the world feel smaller. But the last time we went, I don't think any of us will ever camp again. It was late September, cold enough that the mornings came with fog thick enough to swallow the treetops. Kevin had heard about this place from one of his coworkers. Hollow Creek, tucked somewhere along the Blue Ridge, past an abandoned mining site. The coworker told him the trout there were as big as your arm, and the place was untouched. That word stuck with me, untouched. You hear that about a lot of places in the Appalachians, but sometimes untouched means left alone for a reason. We got there late afternoon after a long drive through switchback roads and unmarked dirt paths. The creek wasn't much, narrow, twisting, maybe 20 feet across at its widest. But the water was dark and clear, reflecting the trees like glass. You could hear it running even when the forest was still. It had this low, constant murmur that almost sounded like people talking far away, just out of earshot. Ross said it reminded him of the sound of the mines, how air moves through old tunnels long after they're empty. Kevin joked that maybe it was the mines, still breathing. I laughed too, but even then the joke didn't sit right. We set up camp right along the bank. Fire pit, chairs, everything. The first night went smooth. We cooked sausages, drank cheap beer, and listened to the creek. Around midnight, the fog rolled in heavy, swallowing the opposite bank completely. I remember saying, "Feels like this whole valley's holding its breath." Ross chuckled, but Kevin didn't. He was staring at the water like he was trying to see something beneath it. That's when we started hearing the sounds. It was soft at first, little bursts of whispering between the flow. You couldn't make out words, just syllables, fragments. We figured it was water moving over rocks, maybe frogs, or air pockets under the mud. But then it changed. The sounds started to form patterns. Pauses, tones like someone actually speaking. Kevin leaned forward, squinting at the surface. "You guys hear that?" Ross nodded slowly. "Yeah. Sounds like someone talking." We all went quiet. The whispering carried over the water. Faint, breathy, but just clear enough to make the hair on your neck rise. It didn't sound random anymore. It sounded like language. I remember hearing my name first. Not shouted, whispered. Drawn out. "Daniel." I froze. I looked at Ross and Kevin, thinking maybe one of them had said it. But they were both staring at the creek, faces pale in the firelight. Then it said Kevin's name. Slowly. Almost like it was learning how to form the word. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried, like it was just beneath the surface, the current dragging it along. Ross stood up fast, grabbed his flashlight, and said, "All right, who's screwing with us?" He aimed the light across the water. Nothing. Just fog, trees, and the faint shimmer of the stream. We sat there another hour trying to laugh it off. But nobody did. The voices kept fading in and out, always soft, always right below the current. When I finally crawled into my tent, I could still hear them. I put in earbuds and played static until I fell asleep. The next morning was colder. Gray sky, no birds. Kevin looked terrible. Eyes red, hands shaking. He said he hadn't slept. Said the whispers hadn't stopped all night. Ross said he didn't hear anything once he was in his tent, but he looked shaken too. We tried to distract ourselves by hiking upstream, figuring maybe the water echo was bouncing off something. Maybe a cave or hollow. The creek wound through thick brush and patches of moss-covered rock. The further we went, the quieter it got. Even the water sounded off, slower, heavier. The color changed too. It stopped being clear and turned darker, like oil mixed with dirt. I remember stepping into the shallows at one bend, feeling the silt slide between my boots. The water was freezing. I crouched to look closer and saw something under the surface. Not movement exactly, but a shape. Like wood, maybe. Ross called me over to another spot a few feet up. Something was sticking out of the mud. It was a cross. Old, rotting, maybe 1.5 feet tall. Someone had carved initials into it. Jagged, rough letters that looked fresh despite the age. The initials were DM. I froze. That's me. Daniel Moore. I looked over at Kevin and Ross. They stared at it, then at me. Ross tried to laugh it off, said, "Could be anyone." But his voice cracked. We stood there staring at it too long. Then Kevin pointed out something else. More wood sticking out of the bank on the opposite side. He waded through the water and pulled up another small cross, half buried. KT. Kevin Thomas. We all just stared at each other. He dropped it like it burned him. His hand was shaking. Ross said, That's not funny." We didn't even look for another one, but part of me knew there'd be one for him too. The whispers started again. Louder this time. Not names, not at first. Just low, garbled words, like the sound of breath bubbling through water. Then came crying. Soft, choking sobs that rose and fell with the current. We backed away. I remember saying, "We need to leave." Kevin nodded immediately. Ross hesitated. Said maybe it was some memorial, maybe miners who died in the floods. But even as he said it, he was packing his gear. The hike back felt longer than it should have. The air had that heavy, still quality, like the forest was listening. Every few minutes, one of us would stop and look back. I swear, sometimes I heard the sound of running water even when the creek was out of sight, like it was following us through the trees. By the time we reached camp, the sky was turning orange, but none of us wanted to stay another night. We tore everything down fast. The whole time that smell of wet mud clung to the air, thick and sour like decay. When we finally got the fire out and packed the last bag, Ross said he needed a minute before we left. He walked back down toward the creek alone. I watched him disappear into the fog. A few minutes passed, then 5, then 10. No sound. I called out, nothing. Kevin grabbed his flashlight and we both went after him. The fog was dense, clinging to our faces, making the beams scatter. When we reached the water, it looked darker than before, almost black. The smell was stronger too, like rust and something else, something foul. We found Ross standing knee-deep in it, staring down. His light was floating next to him, half submerged. I shouted his name and he looked back, eyes wide like he'd just woken up. His lips were moving, whispering something, but I couldn't hear. I grabbed his arm, pulled him out, yelling, "What the hell are you doing?" He kept shaking his head, saying, "They said my name. They said they're sorry." We dragged him back to camp. He didn't fight, but he wouldn't talk either. Just sat there mumbling. Kevin finally snapped and shouted, "We're leaving now." We got him into the truck and drove through that maze of dirt roads until the GPS finally found signal. Ross didn't say a word the entire drive. When we dropped him off, he just said, "Don't go back there," and walked inside. A week later I called him. No answer. Tried again, nothing. Kevin said he hadn't heard from him either. 2 days after that, his sister called me. They found Ross's truck parked at a boat launch about an hour from Hollow Creek. His wallet was inside, along with his phone and his boots. No sign of him. They never found his body. Kevin stopped returning my messages after the search ended. Last I heard, he moved out west somewhere. I still think about that place. About those crosses, and how the creek whispered our names like it already knew us. Sometimes I dream about it, the sound of water flowing over stone, soft and steady. And in the middle of it, faintly, I hear that voice again. Not calling me this time, just whispering something that sounds like crying. And every time it fades, I wake up with that same smell in my nose. Wet mud and rust. I don't think the creek ever stopped whispering. I think it just moved on to whoever listens next. It was supposed to be one of those easy camping trips. 2 friends, a couple of bottles, and the kind of silence you can only find in the mountains. We'd been hiking through the southern Blue Ridge for 3 days, trying to disconnect from everything. No phones, no service, no noise. Just the forest, the cold creek water, and the sound of wind slipping through the trees. On that 3rd night, though, the woods stopped feeling like a place you could escape to. They felt like a place that had been waiting for us. We set up camp on a little rise overlooking a dry riverbed. It had been years since the water ran through it, but the stones were smooth, worn down by time. There was an old fire ring there already, a circle of blackened rocks, probably from some hunter or hiker long before us. My buddy Mason said that was a good sign, meant we weren't the first to find it. I remember thinking it felt the opposite. The air turned cold fast after sunset, so we started a fire and cracked open one of the bottles we packed. The flames were strong, snapping against the wind, throwing those long shadows that make the forest look alive. Mason was telling a story, something about an old prospector who vanished near these woods in the 60s, when the smoke changed. I don't mean the color or the smell. It just shifted. The wind had been steady all night, but now the smoke curled back toward us, against the direction it should have gone. I noticed it first. The way it didn't just drift but coiled, like it was being pulled. I laughed, said something about the whiskey, and leaned back to watch it twist upward. That's when I saw it take shape. It started faint, just a pattern in the haze. But the longer I stared, the clearer it got. The smoke folded in on itself, forming the soft outline of a face. A child's face. I thought it was the flicker of the flames playing tricks, but it stayed. Pale eyes, hollow mouth, hair spilling out into the rising smoke. She looked about 10, maybe younger. I blinked, looked away, and when I looked back she was still there. The expression never changed. Just that blank, open-mouthed stare. I felt something tighten in my chest, that deep, quiet panic that creeps up before you can rationalize it. Mason hadn't noticed yet, so I nudged him, pointed, and said, "Do you see that?" He stared for a few seconds, frowned, then reached for his phone. "Hold on," he said, half laughing. "If it's a ghost, we're getting proof." The flash went off, and for a moment the smoke scattered, but as soon as it cleared, she was gone. The air fell still again. The fire cracked, and everything looked normal. We didn't talk much after that. Mason checked his phone, no signal, then put it away and said, "We're just tired." I agreed, but neither of us touched the whiskey again. We sat in silence until the fire burned down to embers, both pretending not to look at the smoke anymore. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing soft sounds outside, like something brushing against the tent. Once or twice I heard the faint crunch of leaves, slow and deliberate. I wanted to call out to Mason, but I didn't want to make it real. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of firelight flickering across a pale face, eyes watching from behind the glow. At dawn, I unzipped the tent and froze. Every single zipper on both tents, mine and Mason's, was wide open. The air was cold enough to sting, and the fire pit was nothing but gray ash. Around it, I saw small impressions. Handprints. Dozens of them. Tiny, delicate, pressed into the soft ash like someone had crouched there, touching every edge of the fire circle. Too small to be ours. Too perfect to be from an animal. Mason came out a minute later, rubbing his eyes, asking why I was standing there like that. When he saw the handprints, he stopped talking. We both looked around, half expecting to see someone, or something standing nearby. But the woods were empty. Not a sound. Even the birds had gone quiet. We packed fast that morning. No breakfast, no coffee, just silence. Mason didn't say a word until we were halfway back down the trail. Then he asked, "You think somebody was out there?" I told him I didn't know. But the truth is I did. I just didn't want to say it out loud. It wasn't until a few days later, when I got home, that he sent me the picture. The one from his phone. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The image was blurry, like you'd expect from a night shot, but the fire was clear enough, and in the center of the flames, framed by smoke, was that face. A little girl. Eyes empty, mouth open. The same one I'd seen. Mason texted right after. "Tell me you see it too." I called him, but he didn't answer. When I finally got him on the phone later that night, he said he'd been hearing noises at his place. Whispers outside the window. He thought maybe it was just wind, or maybe he was just thinking too much about the trip. He said he was going to delete the photo. I told him I would too. I didn't. About a week later, I got a call from his sister. Mason had fallen asleep on the couch. Fire going in the fireplace. The next morning, she found the house full of smoke. The chimney had backed up. They said it was an accident. Smoke inhalation. But when they took his phone from the table, the screen was still lit. That same picture was open. I've moved twice since then. I still camp, but never near that ridge, never where the trees feel too still. The photo's still on my old phone, buried in a folder I haven't opened in years. Sometimes I think about deleting it, but something stops me. Like if I get rid of it, I'll forget it was real. Every once in a while, when I sit by a campfire, even a small one in my backyard, I'll watch the smoke twist upward. It moves the way it always did, smooth and random, until the moment it isn't. And sometimes, when the wind hits just right, I swear I see her again. Just for a second. The same hollow eyes, the same open mouth. And every time I think about Mason, how he said he was going to delete the picture, how maybe he did, and how maybe she didn't like that. We'd been told not to camp near Tucker Ridge, not because of bears or weather or anything that made sense, but because, as the old man at the general store said, the wind up there carries what it shouldn't. I remember Mason laughing, thinking it was just another mountain ghost story to keep outsiders away. I laughed too. We both did. But that night, the wind didn't sound like wind. It was early October, and we were doing a weekend hike across part of the Blue Ridge stretch near Buchanan County. The days were warm, the nights sharp with that thin mountain cold. Tucker Ridge sat off the main trail, not marked, but visible if you knew where to look. We didn't plan on camping there. We were supposed to stop earlier, near a creek crossing, but we pushed too far trying to make time. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, that ridge was the only flat spot for miles. It wasn't much to look at, just a wide spine of rock, sparse pine trees, and a drop on one side that vanished into blackness. The view was beautiful in that quiet, dangerous kind of way. You could see forever, right up until you couldn't see anything at all. We set up camp near a boulder, made a small fire, and ate what we had left. Jerky, some granola bars, and instant coffee that tasted like ash. The wind picked up after dark, thin and high-pitched, threading through the needles overhead. It had that hollow sound that plays tricks on you, like voices stretched too far to make out. I remember telling Mason it sounded like crying. He just grinned, said, "You're letting the locals get in your head." We were talking about heading to bed when it started. At first, it was faint, like someone calling out in the distance. A woman's voice, sharp and desperate, just barely carried by the wind. We both froze. It came again, closer this time. "Help me." The words were thin, trembling, swallowed by the air before they fully formed. Mason grabbed his flashlight and said, "That's a person. Someone's hurt." He was already standing before I could stop him. I told him to wait, that it could be the wind or an echo, but the voice came again, clearer. A scream this time. Long, ragged. The kind that doesn't sound rehearsed or distant. It sounded real. We left the fire burning low and started toward the tree line. The forest swallowed the light fast, branches closing in, the ground soft with pine needles. The air felt heavier out there, thicker, like sound didn't carry the same way. We kept hearing her, always a little ahead of us. "Please, help me." Sometimes behind us. Sometimes to the left. The direction kept changing, even when we turned in circles. I tried calling out, "Hello? Where are you?" But the moment I did, the forest went quiet. Just the crunch of our boots and the thud of my heartbeat. Then, from somewhere to our right, another scream ripped through the dark. Mason took off toward it before I could say anything. I followed, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off trunks and brush. We came out into a clearing. Wide, open, empty. No one there. No sound but the wind. Then I saw it. About 20 feet ahead, something glowed red against the ground. I thought it was a fire at first, but it was smaller, sharper, a flare. Still burning. The smoke rose thin and gray into the night. Mason and I just stood there, breathing hard, watching it hiss. "Someone's here," he whispered. "They can't be far." We circled the area, calling out again. Nothing. Just that faint hiss and the smell of burning chemical. Then I saw the footprints, clear in the dirt, leading away from the flare, heading toward the ridge's edge. They were deep, spaced like someone running, small prints like a woman's. Mason followed them, flashlight cutting through the dark, until we reached the edge. The footprints stopped right at the drop. The cliff fell maybe 60 feet straight down into rocks and brush. No sign of anyone below. We stood there for a long time, the wind pushing up from the hollow below, cold and sharp against our faces. Mason leaned over with his light, scanning the slope. "You think she fell?" I shook my head. No broken branches. No drag marks. He just stared into the dark. Then the scream came again. Not from below, but behind us. We spun around, light slicing through the trees, but there was nothing. The sound had circled us. We started backing toward camp, both of us shaking now, the kind of fear that doesn't hit your chest, it hits your bones. The screams kept coming closer and closer, until it didn't sound like just one voice anymore. It sounded like many. Like the wind itself was full of people crying out all at once. When we broke through the tree line, our fire was gone. Just smoke. The tent flaps were open, swaying in the wind. And sitting beside the dead fire pit, still glowing faintly, was another flare. I swear on my life, we hadn't brought any flares. We didn't talk. We didn't pack. We just left. We walked until our legs gave out, until the sun started rising behind the trees. By morning, we found the trail again and followed it back down toward the ranger station. The man there, an older sheriff named Dillard, listened to everything. He didn't laugh, didn't interrupt, just nodded slowly. When I told him about the flare and the footprints, he looked at the ground for a long time. Then he said, "No one's lived up on Tucker Ridge since the 90s. A hiker went missing there. Woman. Search teams went through for weeks. Found her tent, her gear, and a burned-out flare near the cliff. No body." He said it in that slow, deliberate tone people use when they're trying not to scare you more than you already are. Before we left, he told us one last thing. "You boys did right leaving when you did. Folks say when the wind turns just right, it carries the voices of them still looking to be found. Doesn't mean they're there. Just means the mountain remembers." We drove home in silence. Mason didn't say a word for the entire 6-hour ride. A week later, he sent me a message. Just a voice memo. It was quiet for the first few seconds. Then the sound of wind. Then, faintly, a woman's voice whispering something I couldn't make out. I called him right after. He didn't pick up. When I finally reached him the next morning, he said the recording had just appeared on his phone during the night. No number, no sender. Just that single file named Tucker_01. He deleted it. Said he didn't want to hear it again. I didn't tell him that I'd copied it before he did. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I play it back. It's quiet for the first few seconds. Then the wind rises, just like before. If you listen close under the rush of air, you can hear her voice again. Faint, begging, "Please, help me." But the last time I played it, there was something different. After her voice fades, there's another, low, almost a whisper, saying my name. I deleted it right after that. Or at least I thought I did. Because last night, while I was sitting alone in my apartment, my phone lit up again. New file. Same name. We weren't supposed to be that far off the trail. It started as a quick detour, a shortcut, or so we thought, that turned into 6 miles of bad footing and fog so thick it felt like the air itself had weight. By the time we found the cabin, it was already getting dark, and the rain was coming down hard enough to sting. I remember thinking how lucky we were to stumble on any kind of shelter that deep in the Blue Ridge. But looking back, I think that's the moment things went wrong. The cabin sat in a hollow between the trees. Small, 1-story, would grade from weather. It didn't look abandoned so much as forgotten. There was a porch out front, half sunk into the mud, and a single lantern hanging crooked from a hook. The weird thing was, it wasn't on the map. I always carry a physical topo map on long hikes, not just a GPS, and this place wasn't marked anywhere. No trail, no ranger station, no symbol of any kind. Mason pushed the door first. It creaked open like it hadn't been touched in years, but inside, it didn't match. Everything was too still, too normal. Boots lined up neatly by the door. 2 coffee mugs on the table. Dark rings dried at the bottom. A half-burnt candle. On the wall hung a hunting rifle. Dusty but oiled. Even the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and old coffee. Not the rot or mildew you'd expect from an abandoned place. I found a journal sitting open on the table. The handwriting was clean, blocky, like someone trying to stay calm while writing in a hurry. The last entry was dated October 14th, 1993. I remember that because it was the day after my birthday, a weird coincidence that stuck with me later. The entry was short. Rain hasn't stopped for 3 days. Tracks outside again. It found us. It found us again. And that's where it ended. The pen still lay across the page. Mason said it was probably someone's old hunting shack. Maybe a bad storm or animal drove them off. He was half right. We decided to stay. The rain was too heavy to hike through, and our tents were soaked from earlier. We built a small fire in the stone hearth and set our gear near the wall. The cabin didn't creak or groan much, just sat there quietly, like it was listening. The rain beat against the windows, and for a while it was almost cozy. But then the noises started. At first it sounded like dripping. water leaking from the roof somewhere. Then came the scraping, slow and steady, from under the floorboards. I thought maybe an animal had crawled beneath the foundation, but when I pressed my ear to the floor, the sound stopped. It stayed quiet until I backed away, then started again, closer this time, right beneath my feet. Mason laughed it off, said the place was settling. But his laugh sounded thin. He'd been glancing toward the window every few minutes, his eyes following something I couldn't see. Around midnight, the fire burned low. I couldn't sleep, so I sat at the table, staring at the journal. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the only sound was that faint scratching somewhere outside. I turned a few pages back in the notebook. The earlier entries were all about hunting trips, weather, gear lists, normal stuff. Then the tone shifted. Heard someone walking outside last night. Lights in the trees. No footprints this morning, but the dogs won't stop pacing. Then one line that made my chest tighten. We tried leaving. The trail led us right back here. I woke Mason around dawn. The rain had stopped, and a pale fog hung low over the trees. We should go, I told him. He nodded. Neither of us wanted breakfast. We packed our bags fast, stepped outside, and froze. The cabin wasn't there. We stood on open ground. No porch. No walls. No chimney. Just bare earth, slick with mud, and a rectangular patch of grass pressed flat where the floor should have been. Our gear sat right where we'd left it, like someone had set it down on the ground in the same shape as before. The footprints we'd made the night before were still there in the mud, leading to nowhere. Mason started yelling, asking where it went, if this was some kind of joke. But I just stared. The air felt different. Hollow, empty. Like we were standing inside something invisible. The sound around us was dead quiet. Even the birds were gone. We checked our compass. It spun. Just kept turning. GPS wouldn't lock. Every direction looked the same. Trees and fog. We started walking downhill, thinking it'd lead to the creek or the trail. But every few minutes, I'd glance back and swear I saw the cabin again, far behind us through the mist. Just the outline of it. A shadow where the fog was thicker. We walked for hours. The forest didn't change. No landmarks, no slope, just endless trees. My legs burned, my throat was dry, and still we didn't find the trail. At one point Mason stopped and said, "Listen." Somewhere far off, faint, we heard it, a hammering sound. 3 knocks, slow and steady, like wood on wood. Then silence. Then 3 more. We followed the sound, stupidly, thinking maybe it was someone chopping or working on a cabin. The noise grew softer, then shifted direction, like it was moving with us. Then, when it stopped, we realized where we were. Back at the clearing. The same patch of ground. The same footprints. Only this time there was something new. The journal lay in the mud, open to that last page. I swear it hadn't been there when we left. The ink on the final line looked fresh. Darker, wetter. The last words had changed. Now it said, "It found you too. We left everything. Just ran." I don't remember how we got back to the main trail, but when we did, the rain had started again. My watch said it was 7 p.m., but the sun was high, like it was morning again. Time didn't make sense anymore. When we finally reached the ranger station, the guy at the desk looked at us like we'd seen a ghost. I tried to tell him about the cabin, but he just frowned. Said there hadn't been any structure out that way in decades. They'd burned the last hunting shack down in 2005 after a storm made it unsafe. He even showed us the satellite map. Empty forest where we'd been. Nothing else. That night, in the motel room, Mason couldn't sleep. He kept saying he heard something under the floor, a faint scraping like before. I told him it was just the plumbing, the wind, anything. Then he pointed at the wall. "You hear that? 3 knocks. Slow. Steady." I didn't sleep either. The next morning, Mason was gone. His bag, his keys, his boots, all still there. Just the door left wide open, rain coming in across the floor. I called his name for hours, checked the woods, called the sheriff. Nothing. That was 3 months ago. They never found him. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up and think I smell coffee. Faint, like it's been sitting out too long. And when I close my eyes, I can hear rain on a roof that isn't there. I haven't gone hiking since. But last week, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook, old and warped from moisture. The last page was blank, except for a single line written in the same blocky handwriting I'll never forget. It found me again. I first saw him just before sundown, the sky over Laurel Fork dimming into that pale, cold gold that always comes before the dark settles in. I'd been hiking solo for 2 days, trying to reach a campsite near the water before nightfall, when I came across the creek. The air was still, except for the low gurgle of the stream winding through the rocks. That's where I saw him, a tall, thin man standing perfectly still in the shallows, staring down into the water. At first, I thought he was a fisherman, but as I got closer, I realized he didn't have any gear. No pole, no pack, not even shoes. Just a torn parka hanging loose over his shoulders, the fabric soaked dark at the edges. He didn't move when I called out, didn't turn his head or even blink. The water ran around his legs, cold and fast, and he just stood there like part of the creek itself. "Hey, you all right?" I said again, stepping closer. His skin looked gray in the fading light, his face drawn tight, like someone who hadn't eaten in days. He didn't answer, didn't even flinch. I felt that unease crawl up my spine, that quiet sense something wasn't right, so I decided to leave him be. I turned to grab my bag, looked back once more, and he was gone. No sound of splashing, no movement, just the creek, whispering like nothing had been there at all. I tried to convince myself he'd just walked off while I wasn't looking. The woods around Laurel Fork are full of wanderers and folks living off-grid. You learn not to ask too many questions. Still, I couldn't shake how fast he'd vanished, or the way he'd stared into the water like it was showing him something. I made camp about 50 yards from the creek. The sound of the water usually helps me sleep, but that night it felt wrong. The rhythm wasn't steady. Every so often I'd hear a sharp splash, like something heavy stepping in and out of the current. I'd shine my flashlight toward the sound, but the beam never caught anything. Just trees and dark water. Around midnight, I woke to it again. Only this time it was closer. Slow, steady splashing, coming from right down the slope where the creek bent behind my tent. I unzipped the flap just enough to look out. The moon had come out from behind the clouds, pale and thin, just enough light to see shapes through the trees. That's when I saw him. He was waist deep in the creek again, same parka, same empty stare, but now he was moving. Not walking. Swaying. His head tilted toward the water, lips moving like he was whispering to someone. The sound of his voice barely reached me. A low murmur, uneven, like a prayer or a conversation. The longer I watched, the more it seemed like the water itself was answering him. Every time his voice dropped, the current bubbled louder, gurgling up words that weren't quite words. Then he leaned forward, hands dipping beneath the surface, still mumbling. Slowly, he began to lower himself. Knees bending, back curving, face almost touching the water. I thought he was washing or maybe searching for something, but then he just kept going. Inch by inch, sinking down until only the top of his head showed above the current. I waited for him to stand back up. He didn't. The ripples stilled. The creek went quiet again. I don't remember how long I sat there, frozen, staring at that spot. My flashlight stayed in my lap, my hand shaking too hard to lift it. After a few minutes, I zipped the tent shut and told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The dark, the cold, the exhaustion. Maybe he'd just walked downstream, out of sight. By morning, I half believed that story. But when I went down to the creek to fill my water bottle, I saw the footprints, long, narrow, bare, pressed deep into the mud. They led straight into the water and stopped there. Nothing came out. When I reached the ranger station that afternoon, I told the man on duty what I'd seen. He listened without interrupting, then rubbed his jaw and said, "You were camped by the fork, right? Down near the old bridge." I nodded. He leaned back in his chair, sighing like he'd heard it before. "That's not the first time someone's seen him," he said. "We get reports every couple of years. Same thing, Tall, skinny fella, always by the water. Sometimes he talks, sometimes he don't. Always disappears before daylight. Who is he? I asked. The ranger shrugged. Could be a drifter, could be worse. Used to be a fella lived up that way, trapper or miner, depending on who you ask. Went missing in the 80s. Some say he drowned trying to cross after a storm. Others say he never left. Hard to tell what's true anymore. He hesitated, then added quietly, only thing is, every time someone sees him, the river swells within a day or two. Dangerous currents. People go missing. That night, I stayed in a small motel near the edge of town. I thought I'd sleep fine, away from the woods, away from the creek. But around 3 a.m., I woke to a sound that didn't belong. A faint trickle. Running water. I sat up, heart pounding. The sink was dry. The shower, too. Then I saw it, a thin line of moisture seeping out from under the bathroom door. I got up slowly, crossed the room, and turned the handle. The light flicked on, harsh and yellow. The floor was wet, puddled near the drain. The tap wasn't running, but I could hear it, that same gentle murmur like a voice speaking underwater. I leaned closer, and for a second, I swore I saw a face in the reflection of the puddle. Hollow eyes. Lips moving. The same man. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and the sound stopped. The water was gone. Bone-dry floor. No reflection. The next morning, I packed up and drove home without checking out. I told myself I'd never go back to those woods again. But a week later, I got a voicemail from the ranger station. The man's voice was tense. Just wanted to let you know, the forks flooded bad. 3 feet over the banks. We found a campsite down there, washed out. Yours, maybe. Anyway, stay clear for a while. He paused before hanging up. Funny thing though, we found fresh footprints in the mud near the bridge. Barefoot. Too big to be yours. That was 2 months ago. Last night, I woke to the sound of running water again. Not from the bathroom this time. From outside my window. I live 2 states away, nowhere near a creek. But I could hear it plain as day, soft, steady splashing, and underneath it, a voice whispering something I couldn't make out. When I looked outside, the street was empty. But on the pavement below, the rain hadn't even started, and still there were wet footprints, bare long, leading toward the woods behind my house. And if I listen close enough, even now I can hear it. The sound of water moving, somewhere it shouldn't be. We found that tree just before dusk, towering over the clearing like it had been waiting for us. The trail had gone quiet hours ago. No birds, no wind, just that strange stillness that settles in when the forest wants you gone. We were 3 days into a week-long hike, following an old map I'd picked up from a ranger station near Harlan County. I'd wanted something off the main trail, something wild, something that hadn't seen a tent in years. We didn't notice the scars until we started setting up camp. The tree was massive, oak, maybe older than anything else around it. But when the light hit the bark, you could see the deep grooves running around the trunk, like something had been tied there over and over years ago. The marks were smooth in some places, almost polished, like whatever made them had strained and rubbed until the bark couldn't heal right. I remember Joel running his hand along one of the cuts. Looks like rope burn, he said. Thick one, too. Sarah laughed it off. Maybe they used it to haul something up. Hunters used to hang food in trees, right? Maybe that was true. But something about those grooves made my stomach twist. They were too low to hang anything from, not high enough for a bear bag, too deep for something as light as food. And above us, the branches spread wide and heavy, creaking softly in the wind. We built our fire a few feet from the trunk and tried not to think about it. The night came down hard, fast, the way it does in the mountains. Once the fire was the only light left, the woods seemed to close in around it, thick and watchful. The wind started after midnight. It came through the trees in slow breaths, heavy and uneven, and every time it hit that oak it made this low, hollow sound, like a door hinge or a ship's hull settling in the waves. We joked about it at first, calling it the ghost of the tree. But the more it groaned, the less funny it felt. Around 2 a.m., I woke to that sound again, louder now. The wind had died, but the creaking hadn't. I rolled over in my sleeping bag, thinking maybe one of the others had gotten up, but the fire had burned low and everything was still. Then I saw movement. Something swaying. At first, I thought it was just a branch shifting in the dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw legs, bare, pale legs, hanging just low enough that the feet brushed the ground. The rest of the figure was swallowed by shadow, but I could see the rope, or what looked like one, stretching up into the canopy. I froze. I couldn't even breathe. The figure turned slightly as it swayed, and for a moment I thought I saw a face, gray, swollen, eyes sunk deep like pits. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because suddenly Joel was shouting, Sarah sitting up in her bag, flashlight beams slicing through the dark. The figure was gone. The branch that had held it was empty, still trembling slightly, as if something had just been there. "What the hell did you see?" Joel asked. I pointed at the tree. There was someone hanging from that branch. He looked, then shook his head. "No one's there, man. You probably just saw the wind move the leaves." But I knew what I saw. The rope. The feet. The slow, awful sway. Sarah tried to laugh it off, but she didn't sleep again that night. None of us did. At dawn, we found something we hadn't noticed before. Around the base of the oak, half covered in leaves, was a patch of dirt that looked disturbed. Not new, but old. The ground had sunk in a shallow oval, maybe 6 feet long. A grave-sized shape. Joel said it was probably an old root collapse, but even he didn't sound sure. We packed up fast. None of us wanted breakfast. About a mile down the trail, we ran into an older man. Gray beard, hunting gear, carrying a rifle that looked older than he was. He nodded at us, then glanced back in the direction we came from. "Y'all camp up there by that big oak?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yeah." "Why?" He squinted at me. "You see it." "See what?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked past us, toward the ridge. "There used to be a rope hanging from that branch," he said finally. "Sheriff took it down in the 70s. Fella got strung up there. Murder, they said. But folks around here don't think it was justice they gave him. They think it was something else." Joel frowned. "You mean they hanged the wrong guy?" The old man looked back at us, eyes narrow. "I mean they never took him down." None of us said anything. He shifted his rifle and started walking away. "Don't camp there again," he called over his shoulder. "Some things still look for the rope they lost." We left the woods that afternoon, cutting the trip short. I told myself I wouldn't think about it again. But that night, after the drive home, I woke around 2 a.m. The same time. The window was open, and the curtains were moving slow in the wind. I sat up, heart pounding, because outside, somewhere far off, I could hear it, the faint creaking sound of wood under strain. It went on for a long time, steady, rhythmic, like a rope tightening and loosening in the breeze. In the morning, I checked the trees outside my house. Nothing there. No rope, no marks. Still, every night since, I wake at the same time. 2 a.m. Every time, I hear it again. That same slow groan, wood and rope moving together like something suspended just out of sight. And sometimes, when I'm half awake, I see the shadow of something swaying on the wall, long and thin, moving back and forth even when the air is perfectly still. I remember that night like it was etched into my memory with fire. We'd set up camp on a small clearing off the Appalachian Trail, far enough from the road that the nearest sounds were the rustle of trees and the distant call of an owl. The fire we'd built was low, the embers glowing faintly in the cool air. Mason and I were sitting close, swapping stories about other hikes, while Sarah dozed against a log. Everything was quiet except the occasional snap of burning wood, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears until you notice every little noise the forest makes. That's when I heard the voice. Faint at first, carried by the wind, but clear. "Mind if I share the warmth?" My heart jumped, not just from surprise, but from the way it sounded. Casual, almost friendly, like someone calling out to join a group of strangers. I told Mason I thought it was another hiker, but we hadn't seen anyone on the trail all day. Then he stepped into the firelight. I'll never forget how he looked. His clothes were dusty and torn, streaked with mud as though he'd been crawling through the woods for days. His hair was wild, tangled with pine needles, and his eyes. I can't describe them any other way than too sharp, like they could see right through you and past you at the same time. And the smile. It wasn't right. It didn't move with the rest of his face, like it had been painted on. We offered him food. Mason passed over a granola bar. I held out a piece of jerky. He shook his head slowly. "I'm already full," he said, voice quiet, calm, but with this weight behind it that made me shiver. Then he sat down across from the fire. He didn't pull his knees up or lean forward. He just planted himself there and stared into the flames. Hours seemed to stretch, though the fire barely burned, and he never blinked. Not once. We tried talking to him. Small questions at first, casual things. Where he came from, how long he'd been out here. He didn't answer. Not with words. Just that same fixed, unblinking stare. Every so often, I thought I saw his lips twitch, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. The forest seemed to shift around him. Every rustle of leaves sounded louder, sharper. The wind died down, and suddenly I could hear things I hadn't noticed before. Twigs snapping, the faint scuff of something moving through underbrush, even the soft patter of something sliding across wet leaves. But when I aimed my flashlight, nothing moved but the shadows. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. Mason was fidgeting too, but I think we were both afraid to speak about what we were hearing. Sarah slept through most of it, curled in a ball. I didn't want to wake her, but I wished she would, just so someone else could confirm it wasn't all in my head. At one point, I stood and stepped closer, trying to see his face better in the firelight. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint, rotten, almost like meat left out in the sun too long. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was from the fire or fallen leaves. But it was coming from him. Not strong enough to choke me, but unmistakable if you were paying attention. Hours passed. I don't know how long. Could have been 30 minutes, could have been 3 hours. Every once in a while, the fire would snap and hiss as if it were alive, and he'd tilt his head slightly, listening. And then he'd go back to staring, motionless, silent. I wanted to speak again to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. It was like the forest had its own pulse and he was the center of it. Morning came suddenly, though it shouldn't have. The first rays of sun cut through the trees, warm and soft, and for a moment the woods looked ordinary again. I expected him to be gone, and he was vanished. Not a trace of him anywhere. No footprints, no flattened grass, nothing to suggest he had even existed. But when I looked around, my stomach turned. The firewood we'd stacked, the split logs we'd collected yesterday, had been replaced. They weren't the same. Old, rotten, soaked through. They smelled faintly of meat, the scent still lingering even in the cool morning air. Some had dark streaks running through the wood, damp and sticky. I touched one tentatively. The smell hit me again, more sharply, and I pulled my hand back. Mason didn't speak. Sarah woke then, rubbing her eyes, and the first thing she said was, "Why does it smell like that?" She hadn't noticed the logs when she was asleep, hadn't noticed the man, hadn't felt the weight of his gaze. But now, looking at the fire pit, the replacement wood, even the faint tracks in the mud that weren't ours, she felt it. We packed up as quickly as we could, our movements jerky, tense. The forest around us seemed to watch, quiet but heavy, like it remembered him. Every shadow seemed to twitch in the corners of our eyes. Every gust of wind sounded like soft laughter, a voice just out of reach. When we finally got back to the trailhead, it was mid-morning, sunlight spilling across the gravel road. A couple of hikers were there, laughing, unaware of the night we'd endured. I wanted to tell them, to warn them. But the words didn't make sense out loud. How do you explain a man who appears without footprints, who sits for hours staring into a fire without blinking, whose smell lingers in rotten wood and shadows? We drove home in silence. The smell never left me. Even now, a week later, I can smell it sometimes. Faint, when the wind shifts. Sometimes I swear I can see him in a dark corner, just watching, sitting there and staring with that same rigid smile. I've avoided the woods since. I don't hike at night. I don't camp alone. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed, I hear the faintest crackle like a dying campfire, and I think I can hear his voice, whispering just far enough away to make me doubt what I'm hearing, asking again if I'll share the warmth. I didn't mean to find it. That's the first thing I have to make clear. I was driving late, heading back from a solo hike in the southern Appalachians, tired and trying to make good time. My GPS blinked, suggesting a shortcut through a small back road I'd never noticed before. It said it would cut 15 minutes off my drive. I followed it. At first, the road seemed normal, thin, winding, old asphalt, trees pressing close to the edges. But after a few miles, it felt different. Quiet. Too quiet. Then the campground appeared. Or at least, that's what the sign said. Echo Pines Campground. The letters were faded, peeling, the paint chipped away in sections, but it looked legitimate. A dirt road curved into a small clearing lined with cabins and tents. Old fire rings were set neatly in front of some sites, benches scattered near the trees. There were no cars, no other hikers, no campers. Nothing moved except the wind through the pines, whispering like voices just out of reach. I parked in the first empty spot I found, grabbed my backpack, and started setting up a small tent. At first, everything felt normal enough. The smell of damp pine needles, the soft rustle of the trees, even the distant call of a night bird. But as the sun sank behind the ridge, I realized just how silent it was. No crickets, no frogs, no water running nearby. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you notice every little sound you'd normally ignore. I started a small fire, stacked logs I found nearby, and tried to make myself comfortable. The campground had everything you'd expect. Old signs pointing to Cabin 3, a board with faded rules posted on a tree, even a pit with stones in a perfect circle. But there were no people. And that absence began to weigh on me. Night fell thick and still. The fire crackled, throwing weak shadows across the cabins. I tried to get some rest, telling myself I'd only stay the night, leave at first light. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I could swear I heard whispers, tiny, indecipherable, almost like distant voices echoing from the woods just outside the campground. I sat up, heart pounding, shining my flashlight into the trees. Nothing. Only shadows stretching long in the firelight. Around midnight, I walked the small loop of the campground, trying to convince myself it was real. Cabin doors were closed, fire rings empty, no movement anywhere. I called out once, then laughed at my own paranoia. Hello. My voice sounded too loud in the still night. There was no answer. Not even the echo I expected. I returned to my tent and tried to sleep. I must have dozed off because I remember waking suddenly, fire long gone down to embers, moonlight spilling across the clearing. That's when I noticed the faint smell first. Smoke. Charred wood. But not from the fire I'd built. Something deeper, older, like a house burned a long time ago. I looked around, heart hammering, but nothing appeared different. Everything looked as it had before, perfectly still, perfectly intact. Morning came slow. I packed my things, double-checked the small sign at the road, and took a few photos with my phone. Something about that felt important, proof that the place existed. I didn't think much about it until I returned to town and stopped at a gas station to refuel and ask for directions. I told the clerk about Echo Pines. Asked casually if she knew the campground. Her reaction was immediate. She went pale, her hands froze over the counter. You what? She asked, voice trembling. Echo Pines. You went there. I nodded, thinking maybe it was obscure or private property. Yeah. Is there a problem? She stared at me for a long time. That campground. Burned down. 23 people trapped inside. 1997. Her lips trembled as she spoke. I froze. No one survived. I thought I must have misheard. Maybe a different campground. I asked for details. She only shook her head and whispered, You shouldn't have gone there. I pulled out my phone, trying to show her the pictures I'd taken. The camera app opened, the gallery refreshed, and nothing. No images from that night existed. Not a single file. I scrolled through every folder, hoping maybe they'd saved somewhere else. Empty. Like I had never even pointed the camera. I drove back slowly, unable to shake the feeling that the road had shifted, changed somehow. Trees that had seemed distant on the way in now loomed closer. Paths that I was sure I'd passed seemed unfamiliar. The forest pressed against the car windows, heavier, darker, as if the place itself didn't want me leaving. At home, I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion. The isolation. Maybe my mind played tricks after 3 days hiking alone. But then I noticed little things. The scent. Faint smoke lingering on my jacket, even after laundering. Small scratches on my backpack straps I hadn't noticed before. A patch of dirt on the sole of my boot that didn't match any trail I had been on. I tried to explain it to friends, but they laughed. Maybe it was an abandoned campground, one said. Or a mirage from hiking too long. But I knew what I saw. The signs. The fire rings. The small cabins. The way the trees leaned unnaturally toward the clearing, as if in silent mourning. And that smell, faint but unforgettable, like old smoke and wet pine. The strangest part is how the memory persists, not as a memory, but as something alive in the edges of perception. Sometimes at night, I swear I see that clearing in dreams. Fire rings glowing faintly, a lone cabin at the far end, perfectly intact. Sometimes I wake up, and I can almost hear the faint echo of footsteps, soft, careful, moving between the trees, though I'm in my apartment hundreds of miles from those mountains. I don't go hiking the back trails anymore. I don't trust GPS directions that take me through empty forest roads. But occasionally, when the wind shifts right, I catch a faint scent in the air. Smoke and pine, burned wood and wet earth, and I remember echo pines. I remember the way the night pressed in, the stillness, and the feeling that the place had been waiting for me. I keep telling myself it was all in my head. Maybe it was. But sometimes, just sometimes, I can't shake the sense that it isn't gone at all. That somewhere, far back in those Appalachian pines, Echo Pines still exists, waiting for someone else to follow the GPS. And I'm not sure I'll ever want to know what happens when they do. I woke in the middle of the night to a sound that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was the wind, a branch scraping against the tent, the usual creaks and groans of the Appalachian woods at night. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. Not hurried, not panicked, just heavy and steady, pressing into the soft earth. My heart froze. The rhythm was unnatural. Too methodical to be an animal. Too deliberate to be random. I lay there for what felt like hours, ears straining, body rigid. The forest was alive with its usual nocturnal chorus, but the footsteps were separate from it, echoing close enough that I could almost feel the vibration through the ground. Every time I dared to breathe, the steps stopped and a heavy silence would settle. I forced myself to remain still, barely daring to move, to speak, to do anything at all. "Who's there?" I whispered finally, my voice cracking in the cold night air. There was no answer, only a pause, and then the sensation of something leaning against the side of the tent. Close. Too close. I could feel the pressure of its presence through the thin canvas, hear a wet, rasping breath that made my stomach churn. It wasn't human in sound, but not animal either. Somewhere between, like someone who had been breathing wrong for a long, long time. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The sounds continued, circling, stopping, leaning again, always testing me. My flashlight was within reach, but I couldn't bring myself to grab it. I feared the light might make it move faster, or vanish, or even notice me in a way I wasn't ready to face. I pressed myself into the corner of my sleeping bag, willing the night to pass, willing the presence outside to go away. Time lost all meaning. The steps continued, a quiet rhythm in the darkness, slow and deliberate, like someone inspecting me, studying my campsite. Occasionally, a twig snapped somewhere in the woods, sending my heart hammering, only to be answered by the soft, wet scraping along the ground beside my tent. It wasn't moving away. It was just circling, patient, waiting. I remembered the old ranger's warning when I first set up camp. If something feels wrong, it usually is. Don't ignore it. I had ignored it. I'd laughed at the thought of bears or wild animals sneaking around. But this This was different. Something human-shaped, human-scented, but wrong in ways I couldn't explain. Hours passed. I lost track of them. I lost track of the fire in my lantern that had long since died. My limbs ached from holding still, my throat raw from holding my own breath. But the steps never stopped. They didn't rush, didn't grow distant. They circled endlessly. I whispered again, softer this time, almost a prayer, almost pleading. Please, just go away. And for a moment, the forest responded. The footsteps paused. Silence filled the night, thick and almost suffocating. My heart screamed in my chest. I dared not breathe. Then I heard it, the wet rasp of breath again, right against the canvas, closer than before. I couldn't see anything, couldn't move, couldn't scream. My mind tried to fill the shape outside the tent with every story I'd ever heard. Lost hikers, feral people, old legends, but none matched the palpable weight pressing against my skin. I stayed that way until the pale gray light of dawn began to seep through the thin canvas. Only then did I dare move. Slowly, carefully, I unzipped the flap of my tent and stepped outside, half expecting to see a shadow vanish among the trees. The clearing was empty. Sunlight glinted off the dew on the grass. Everything looked normal. But the dirt told a different story. Around my tent, pressed into the soft earth, were footprints. Bare, human-shaped, much like my own but not mine. They circled the tent, matching every step I had imagined, every pause, every lean against the canvas. Then, abruptly, they led off into the woods, away from the fire, away from me. I followed the tracks with my eyes as far as I could see, into the thick Appalachian undergrowth. They disappeared somewhere deep, beyond where the sunlight could reach. I didn't try to follow. I didn't want to. My boots crunched against the leaves as I packed quickly, every sense alert, every nerve screaming. I felt eyes watching from the trees, shadows shifting just beyond the reach of the morning light. The forest that had felt quiet and inviting the day before now felt hostile, alive and patient. I left that campground without looking back. Even on the drive home, I couldn't shake the sound of those steps, the wet rasp of breath, the patience in the circling rhythm. At night, in my own apartment, I sometimes hear it still. Soft, deliberate, pacing just beyond my walls. Not a shadow, not a shape, but the echo of presence. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the trees outside rattle in the dark, I swear I can feel it circling me again. Just like that night. Just like it never left.